Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is Jill Troderman with Feeding the Family. Today is July 30th. So, struggling with weight is one of the top concerns Americans face. Our youth, our teens, our adults are now subject to terrible statistics. People are struggling. More than 2 in 5 are overweight or obese, and the rates are going up and up. But what happens to people when they take their concerns about weight, how they look, how they feel about themselves, to an emotionally and physically unhealthy place where an eating disorder may be cultivated? So today I've got in the studio virtually a nutritionist and dietitian. His name is Parker Nelson, and he is a registered dietitian with a bachelor's degree in business, marketing, and a master's in applied nutrition. He currently works as a dietitian at an eating disorder treatment center and works one-on-one with individual clients seeking weight management advice and general nutrition counseling. He lives in Northern California with his wife, Alexis, and his 2 boys, Colin and Max. Well, welcome, Parker.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So for anyone who wants to lose weight, people are already starting off with a mindset that something's wrong and that they need to correct it. So those corrections can be looked at either dauntingly with fear and trepidation, like, how the heck am I going to accomplish that goal? But some people approach it with joy and excitement as something like a new journey to go on. So you share that after college, you lost 70 pounds yourself, not by dieting, but by rethinking your relationship with food. So I'm wondering, what was your origin story and what catalyzed you to get into nutrition and keep it in a positive way as opposed to going down a dark path?
Wow, I love that intro and
Thank
so
you.
many good questions in it. Yeah. For myself, I know that I happen to really be almost like a passive weight loss. And I say that because I lost a lot of my weight going through the end of college and then post college in like my work settings. And the one work setting where I started to lose a lot of weight was working at a summer camp. And that experience was, it's very different from day to day life where I'm running around all day. I'm out in nature, out in the sun, getting good rest, playing a lot. And then I had like regular scheduled specific meals every single day. And so it really changed the way that I was eating and moving. And that kind of set me onto a journey of, how did I lose a little bit of this weight? And, what's my next steps? Like, how can I continue feeling better? Because I did start to feel better. And like you mentioned, not everyone will feel better right off the bat, and not everyone necessarily needs to lose weight. But at that time, I felt like this could continue to make me feel healthier and be better. And so that kind of set me on that path. And then I just started to explore, what other things can make me healthier, and how can nutrition play a role in this? And so that's what got me into the career that I'm in now.
Right. So you first had that awakening, you could say, and then that got you excited about food and nutrition because you're probably feeling a lot better than you were.
That's right. And I think the thing that you're touching on is so important because, the work I do with patients who have eating disorders, it's that starting point that's different from the starting point that I was lucky enough to have. So like you mentioned earlier, you can either go on a journey that's filled with anticipation and joy and interest, where it kept building on itself. And I started to get more and more interested, and I was just getting healthier and healthier. Whereas a lot of people who come from a background of having an eating disorder, what sets it off is they're told that, they're no good, their body weight is bad, they need to change something drastically. And it's often filled with trauma or neglect or some kind of abuse or issue that's going on that's in the background. And that's what sets them off. So the starting points are extremely different. And because I was lucky enough to have that support, that kind of open-ended area for me to go on, it's very different than what other people can experience. And so I think knowing that for myself, I guess it just makes me grateful, but also I want to pass along that to someone else and start them off on the right journey.
Wow. But you had maybe a positive affect in life, that you were a camp counselor, so maybe you were set up for success in your weight loss, where it wasn't coming from a trauma place.
100%.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that, am I reading or am listening to you correctly?
that's correct. And that's really, a vast majority of the people I work with now who are struggling, it's not coming from a place of, like poor motivation or that they're not smart enough or that they're not, capable enough, because I see them change. But it's just that they were unlucky enough to go through challenges that, I didn't have to go through. They're bigger, stronger, worse challenges. And so to really say, I see you and I understand that that's an issue, and I'm going to help you kind of pull yourself out of that, because they're kind of the only ones who can do that in that situation. And that's kind of the place that I'm at, is trying to help people do that.
Wow. Yeah, because eating disorders are really one of the most complex things, because while it's about food, it really is a psychological issue, right?
That's right, which is why the staff that we have in the facility I work in, most of the staff is very like mental health focused.
Mm-hmm.
So they have multiple therapists, they have a nurse practitioner who focuses on mental health, we have a doctor and a nurse, we have mental health rehabilitation workers, and then my part, that's nutrition. It's very important in re-nourishing their bodies so that they have the mental capacity to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
But really, 80 to 90% of the work is going to be that mental health down the road.
Right. I want to go a little deeper into what, can you share maybe a theoretical or a hypothetical example of someone who does develop an eating disorder? Like, can you just make a story for us about how that happens to somebody? Because a lot of people just have regular weight and they don't, they want to take it off, but it doesn't become a really serious condition where they're at an unhealthy weight, they're losing their periods or vomiting or having all those other impacts. So, like, let's just take a 10 or a 12-year-old girl, let's say, and walk me through like a lifestyle that would lead to an eating disorder.
Yeah, it's a really good starting place that you choose someone like that. I think a lot of us envision that sort of like adolescent, pre-adolescent, or like going through puberty, high school girl, because that is a pretty common like character that we'll see come through our facility.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason for that, and the basis of it is because there's a lot of like neurological changes going on in that phase of life that are contributing to those eating disorder habits and behaviors. And so the fact that there's a stronger association with females as well is because a lot of times there's also that cultural aspect where body image, distorted eating habits, they come from a place of you need to restrict, you need to change your body, you're not good enough. And your body is kind of seen as like, something to be used as like a material to gain something. And so
Hmm.
I think, starting off with that like 10 to 12-year-old girl is kind of, it's sort of that cliche person, but it happens a lot for those reasons. So if we see someone, I'll use that example and say, it's pretty common that we have people who are anorexic come through our facility, which means that their body weight is inappropriately low, and it comes from a place of restriction or binging and purging. And so they're just not an adequate place of nourishment for their body. And so in those cases, if we have a girl like that and she's struggling with low body weight and she's really underfed and unable to, physically and mentally be in a functional place, then what happens is the starvation really cuts off the brain's capabilities of making rational decisions. So what's pretty crazy is I'll talk with a lot of people who are like this, and they can kind of admit to the fact that they have a problem. They have an eating disorder, and they know that something is wrong, and that they should be eating more. They should be eating more of a specific type of food, not cutting out something like carbs or fats or something like that. But the problem is there's really this like neurological thing going on where when they restrict, it's feeding them a positive feeling inside of their brain. Like there's a dopamine release that's coming from that restriction. And
Wow.
so the average person who, when we eat food you might eat something and go, okay, that felt good because it's nourishing my body. Like it's sending the signals evolutionarily to say eating food is good because it supports your body's ability to survive. But what happens is there's this like chemical switch within the brain, and it oftentimes happens when people are going through puberty, when people are going through like things like trauma, anything that can kind of switch the brain's modes per se. And then what happens is now they have these habits where restricting is actually what feels good, as opposed to getting balance, getting nourishment, where most of the population feels good off of that. They actually feel good off the opposite effect.
Boy, oh boy, that is tricky. And I know some personal parents who have dealt with this in their family, and it's so upsetting to observe from the outside. Um, and I've experienced it very slightly in my client base. So when kids are, because I use that example of a 10, 12-year-old kid, because I just thought that's a common time when people start to diet, because I know teen girls, statistically, 80% of them diet or have tried dieting. That never worked for me. I don't think I was ever a candidate for an eating disorder. However, it is a very serious condition. What can you share with parents to avoid these things? Like, is there language to use? Is there social media? The influencing that the kids are getting? Like, I can't even imagine having a teenager right now.
Yes, I know. Well, I'm going to eventually get to that spot because I have two young kids, and it's already starting with like, how do we talk to them about food, and
Mm-hmm.
how to parent really, model good behavior. And I think that's kind of where I would love I guess the practices to start
Okay.
is it stems not so much from like being so perfectly vigilant on, like saying the exact right things, but it's really cultivating an environment that allows them to grow up in like a safe, balanced space. And so if you're thinking about, again, like if you have a teenager and, maybe their body image could improve, or maybe just like their body weight in general could improve, like something about them is not perfectly healthy. How do you approach something like that? And I think if you continue to cultivate like good behaviors from yourself, like you eat well and you view food not through like a moral sense of good and bad, but you say, I'm going to eat 80% healthier food and 20% indulgent food, and I'll make sure that I don't use too strong of language, but I also prioritize nutrient dense foods. I think if you have balance within that in yourself, like you're modeling that behavior within your own eating habits, then I think a lot of people will follow that. I think kids definitely tend to follow how parents act more than what they say. So I think modeling it is a big one. I also think that, back to what we were talking about earlier with things that can influence those switches in the brain, things like trauma, things like cultural cues. I think if you're able to, again, set up an environment where a child is not abused, neglected, is getting safe spaces to eat, can talk about their body in a space where they can be vulnerable and you can work through those things. I think that's just as powerful as, whether or not they have a cookie 2 times a week, or whether or not they, like neglect eating meat or something like that. I think it's really the spaces and the safety that they can feel balanced in.
Wow. Okay. So when, because I'm wondering if it's a perfect storm or if some kids just are more susceptible if they have a sense of perfectionism or they want to be a straight A student and they are on the soccer team and they want to go to a Ivy League school. Like, are those kind of kids more set up for that kind of wanting to be perfect, or can it just happen to any regular kid? And also, does it happen in adults? Like, are regular men and women susceptible to eating disorders as they age?
Yeah, you brought up two really good points. The first one of being, are more people or some people more susceptible? Yes, 100%. So eating disorders have a strong genetic component, and some of those personality traits that you talk about, we definitely see those. Now, eating disorders are different. There's anorexia, bulimia, and then there's things like RFID, there's binge eating disorder, and there's some other smaller, lesser known ones as well. But all of them take on different faces. And so different personalities might lean more heavily into them, but you definitely see that, stronger personalities, especially ones that are geared towards extremes. So you talked about like things like perfectionism. I see a lot of people who view life in terms of like black and white phases. Those people are often very susceptible to eating disorder behaviors. So, for example, someone who sees, like a food as it's either evil and it's a terrible thing to eat, or it's the most amazing, like superfood ever. Those kinds of extremes. If you view food that way, or just like things in life that way, you can be a little more susceptible towards those kinds of behaviors.
Wow.
Um,
I want to dive into that for a minute. Can you share with some of your clients, keeping them anonymous, of course, what would be like the evil food? I might have some that I don't want to eat. And then what are like the superfoods? Because clearly those are very extreme things. So you're saying these people who are susceptible can't see the nuance of food, that it ebbs and flows throughout the day and the week and the year even. And sometimes you might eat more quote unquote junky food if you're on a cruise ship versus an athletic training camp, for instance.
Yes, exactly right. And I think so. Most of us pretty well know. I don't think there's a huge like lack of knowledge between like what a healthier food is versus an unhealthier food. So if you were to say go to McDonald's and order like a burger and fries, that versus like a home cooked bowl of like greens and chicken and like a side of fruit. Obviously, I think most people kind of know one is a little more health promoting, one is less health promoting. Um, but again, it should be viewed on a spectrum, because if someone were to go to McDonald's, once a week and have a meal that's really enjoyable, and then they were eat like these nutrient dense foods most of the time, the rest of the week, their diet would be wonderful. We see really good outcomes from that. Um, but if someone views that McDonald's as like that is going to kill me, that's going to be the end of like my eating experience, I'm going to do really badly off of that, then what happens is they can end up restricting not just that, but like any kind of burger and fries. So like any kind of homemade version. Um,
Right. Okay.
yeah. So then they can start to
Hmm.
see, I guess, like downstream effects of that. So they can say, well, if McDonald's is so bad, then it's probably because, like burger buns are bad, or the meat within it is bad, or the cheese, or maybe it's because of the oil, or like the potatoes and the fries. And so then they start to say, well, I really don't want to be a part of any of that. And so I'm going to restrict, these carbohydrates, or I'm going to restrict like the fat that's within the food. And so then they go on these really low fat, low calorie, low anything type of diet. And the restriction just becomes more and more excessive until, a lack of food, of any kind of food, will not nourish their body. And so opting for like only the extremes puts them in a dangerous situation where they might be put into a lot of places where they're not able to eat food, because guess what? It's not available. Like their option is, hey, you're at an event and, it's not a perfect food that they normally eat, but guess what? Like you need to eat to keep your body functional, and then they'll avoid that. And that'll kind of spiral out of control.
Wow. Boy. What are the statistics? Do you know that off the top of your head? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering how many kids suffer, but it doesn't even matter if you know that or not, but
Oh, like how many kids have an eating disorder?
yeah, I just wonder what percentage of kids.
I believe that in terms of like how many people will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime, it's about a third of people.
Oh, wow, that's not good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging because it's not just within that like adolescent phase. And so I think back to an original question you were talking about, which is, can adults struggle with this?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Like we had a 55-year-old in our facility, and we have plenty of 30, 40, and as high as 50-year-olds who struggle with this. And I've seen people late into their life struggle with this as well, because if it's a habit that's ongoing and isn't, worked out, then it's something that's going to stick with you. And most eating disorders are not something that I guess get treated in quote unquote sense, but instead like you're able to manage them so well that you can overcome them in a sense. But
Right.
really, eating disorders are seen as like this lifelong struggle for people.
I understand that. Right. Um, Now, with people who want to eat really healthily, I do believe there's a term, I don't know if it's in the DSMR or the DSM 6, maybe it is. There's orthorexia,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for folks out there, that is a eating disorder that has to do with people's really obsession with eating 100% what they perceive as quote unquote healthy food to an extreme where they might be counting, 6 almonds and that's all they're going to eat for almonds. And then they're going to slice up their watermelon precisely and weigh it. And it's extreme in another sense, right? Or is it the
Yeah.
same version, but maybe not with the weight loss, but still the obsession? Because any of these things, I think it just has to do with our disconnection to nature and society. I can't imagine there were many eating disorders hundreds of years ago, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I haven't thought about the like past history, at least like beyond, our modern context.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine that it was probably at least different. And I actually think about it from the sense of like, if people had an eating disorder, I'm sure there were some, and if the prevalence was less, the people who had eating disorders, let's say hundreds of years ago, unfortunately, I think they probably didn't live very long. And so that's
Mm.
probably the difference is like we probably didn't see as much of them because if you had one, it didn't go very well and it ended quickly. Because I think nowadays the difference is we can recognize it and before it gets too late, we can kind of rope people in. And so we do have a lot of people who continue to struggle with it because it's such a strong thing that definitely has some like modern context tied to it. But I think there is sort of that like survivorship bias of like, well, we've seen them and we can get them before it's too late because, in a food scarcity environment back, hundreds of years ago, that probably just didn't pan out. Whereas now it's like we can find ways to continue to like hold people up through that process. But it's still a very scary experience because you can hold someone together, but they're still struggling mightily with it.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine those Victorian ladies in their little corset dresses being concerned about their weight. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess we've had societal pressure to look a certain way for a very long time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, it continues to this day. And it's crazy when you were talking about orthorexia earlier. I think it's considered like a disordered eating habit, which is like a little less on the spectrum compared to like an eating disorder where there's clinical guidelines of like your body weight's too low or you purge this many times per week. But orthorexia is still pretty serious. And I think it's very prevalent among people who they have good motivation, which is I want to eat well, but it just goes to an extreme level where it's affecting their quality of life. And so it ends up affecting like their social health, their emotional health, their spiritual health, their mental health. And that's something that I really tried to hammer home with a lot of my clients is like physical health is not the only thing that you're dealing with here. And a lot of times they'll ask questions like, how come I need to have like an indulgent food every once in a while? Well, it's not like your body necessarily needs that in order to survive. But a lot of times eating out, an indulgent meal with friends, that contributes to your social, emotional, mental health. And those are things that we actually want to pull up because that's part of your holistic health that we want to contribute to.
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. I was out with some friends the other night and really I do eat a vegetarian diet, so there wasn't too much on the app menu except for French fries.
Yeah.
And we literally got 2 rounds of French fries, with the sauce and the dip and all the stuff. And I know too much about nutrition, so I wasn't going to harass my waiter and ask him for the ingredients. But that's a perfect example, right, Parker? Of
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
out, we're having a great time, we're listening to music, we're just in the moment. So it's not like I'm going to bust out my bag of pre-prepped tempeh cubes or something weird like that, right?
Yeah, and I think there's different ways to approach that because the average person listening is probably thinking to themselves, well, I still want to be healthy and I want to balance it. Like I might want to have those sometimes, but what if I don't want the fries or what if I just don't want to engage in that? I
Right.
think there's different approaches. Like you can say to yourself, well, you know what, maybe like I'll try a bite because I do want a bite, but I'm gonna make sure that I have something else while I'm out, or I make sure that I have food beforehand. But I do think that like the quality of life will suffer, and I won't feel good if I bring along my food with me, because I just feel like that's too far. Like that might be you. And so I think that there's ways to do it where, you can still support your health of like eating on both ends of that and not having too much of the portion, but
Right.
still saying to yourself, like, I'm going to be engaged with this. I'm going to mindfully eat it so that I don't overeat it. And I think that there's ways to approach it that can balance both of those things.
Right, right. Because we do know French fries aren't the greatest thing on planet Earth, but boy, they are good. Like what were those foods you called them? Engaging foods, indulgent
Like
foods?
indulgent foods. Yeah, that's how
Indulgent foods. Okay.
yeah, I like to call things indulgent food. And then I guess you could just call it like a health promoting food, would probably be like the two ends of a spectrum, right?
Right.
Uh, and the reason I like to use that language is because, again, like you could use the language of like a French fry, and that could mean different things to different people. Like
Right.
I could make that at home with different ingredients than you, and so we have two different foods. But
100%. Right.
and you can have a sandwich and say, like, is a sandwich healthy? Well,
Right.
I don't know. Like, what type of bread did you use? What type of veggies did you put in? Did you use meat? What kind? So I think there's a spectrum of like how a food can present itself in terms of like health promotion or indulgency, which is the other side where it can taste really good and not always be, physically as health promoting. But that balance in the middle is where, we can still find a lot of good foods.
Right, right, right. Right. Because I eat a really super healthy diet. So when I eat those occasional french fries, I'm not really worried about it. It's fun. I'm eating it, whatever. And I think the psychology is really equally as important because the stress that you could put your body under by being upset about a food you ate or an indulgent day, that's going to set off cortisol. You're going to have self-doubt, self-esteem issues. So for me, just like boom, push that day away, go forward and do your best the next day, right? Is
Yeah.
that what you're saying?
Yeah. And what you said was perfect, which is essentially you could either, what would be worse for your health, eating one French fry or worrying about eating the French fry for the rest of the day and not eating it.
100
And
exactly, right? Tell me.
I think it's pretty obvious that like if you had one French fry, you are not as fragile as I'm going to fall apart because of one French fry.
Right.
But if you are worrying about it for the entire day, that's going to have a much worse health effect than just engaging in it once and saying, this is okay and it actually tasted good and my body's going to use some of this potato and oil and it's, we're going to get on with it.
And we are going to get on with it, right? And in
Yeah.
fact, at this moment, I'm going to take a quick break, Parker. So I'm with Parker Nelson, dietitian, and we are talking about food, eating disorders. And when we come back, I want to dip in to your book you wrote. So I'm going to let people hang on to that one, and we will be right back. Okay, everybody, we are back. And this is Jill Troderman with Feeding the Family, and I am joined by Parker Nelson. And we're talking about food and having a healthy relationship with food, including the language that we use, especially with our kids. So, Mr. Nelson. Can you hear me, Parker?
I can.
Okay, great. So I am so impressed that you wrote this, what looks like a fabulous book. I haven't read it, but I sure do want to read it. So let me share with our listeners the name of your book, which is called Nutrition Nonsense: How Social and Psychological Biases Sabotage Our Eating Habits. That is a great title. I just want to dig into that one.
Thank you.
I really want to know, I'm so curious.
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time on the title alone, and then the book itself. It's a lot to write a book, but I wanted it to come off as like, whoa, what's going on in this book?
I do, and it's very compelling because what is the new nutrition nonsense that we're faced today? Because you and I don't need to go down the cereal aisle or talk about sugar and all that kind of stuff. But what are the myths? What are the psychological crazy talk that we get every day?
Yeah, I broke it up into so many different components because I think that there's a lot of different pieces going on here. But the way I describe it is essentially like any of the noise that's coming into our head, whether it's like food manufacturing companies, friends and family, social media, just like our internal sense of like shame, guilt, a need for perfection, things like that. And then anything else just like in the world today that's shaping the way that you view food, and just health in general. And I think all of those things, you've seen it, have become warped in a lot of ways
Mm-hmm.
that make it really difficult to know, what are we supposed to eat, how much are we supposed to eat, where, when, all those things. They become so disrupted that people don't know basics of just like, fruit is completely health promoting. But if you go on social media, you'll find people saying, like they're not, there's a lot of fruits out there that you should not be eating. You should restrict these. You should never eat them. Really strong language like that. And then you'll see food bars that say it's, using natural fruit, or it's, like changing fruit in a certain way, to where you're kind of like, am I eating the right thing? Am I not eating the right thing? What does the nutrition label mean? And so I think people are just like, they're so confused at this point that people have really strong like diet choices that just don't make any sense for them, but they don't even know why they're doing it, but they're just shaped by so much of that noise.
I know. Oh my gosh. I could talk to you for like 5 more hours about this. So go, speak more. Tell us.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like some of the best examples. I think, I already alluded to it, which is like, if you go on social media now, or even if you pick up, I talk about different books that are written about um, nutrition and health. And, you can pick up, you can scroll through Amazon, like the top 10 best-selling nutrition Amazon books, and you'll see that they're all completely different. One of the books will tell you you should only be eating meat. Another book should tell you that you should only eat fruit. Another one is telling you that you have to intermittent fast. Another one's telling you that you have to take juice cleanses every week. Another one's telling you that, it doesn't matter if you have too many calories. Calories don't matter. Another one tells you that like, don't drink coffee at this time, or eggs are bad for you, or, pizza is good or bad at this time of day. And all of those different signals are so contradictory that people are like, well, it's just up to whether or not you picked the right book. Is that what we're, depending
Right.
on?
Yeah. It's like a lottery of hopefully you get the good advice book, because
Exactly.
maybe you'll read the book that's going to mess you up for the next 10 years.
Yeah. And so it's almost like, if you pick up my book, how would you even know that that's the better one? Right. And so
Right.
I
And I
think
wrote a book too. I'll just throw that out there too.
yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
and I think mine is pretty balanced. So
Yeah.
we'll
Well,
have
and
to
then
share books, Parker.
I would love that. What's the name of your book?
My book is called The Food Tree Holistic Nutrition and Wellness Curriculum, a
Oh,
mind, body, soul approach to teaching kids how to eat well and be healthy.
nice.
And
I'm
it's
looking.
really, yeah, it's based on the three macronutrients essentially: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And I
Love
base
it.
it on a tree, and none of the categories are a hierarchy. They're all important. And I think that's
That's
where people get confused with the macronutrients, right? So proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, every different generation, one of those is good or bad. And we're just
that,
coming
yeah.
off the carbohydrate is bad fad. And now we're accepting fats
I
back.
know.
And now we're in a protein binge, I think.
That is great. Yeah, the macronutrients, that is a really interesting discussion too, which is, you're so right that the trendiness of things is what we don't want to get sucked into.
Right.
Because if you have a good sense of nutrition, like you and me and other people who do this for a living, if you have a good sense of it, you don't get thrown off by like one image on social media, or you don't get completely derailed because you saw a video that said stop eating fats. You actually know, like, okay, I know deep down that like these are the kinds of fats I need. This is how much I need of them, because I've not only experienced it, but I know kind of like the core physiology, and I know what's going on there. But
Mm-hmm.
for most people, they don't have that, understanding, but they also don't have that experience to rely on and say, well, this has worked out for me, because they've been dysregulated or just thrown off for so long that they're like, I don't know what to trust. And so they don't know which book to pick up. They don't know which trend to follow. And that can be really harmful for them.
Exactly. So, what would be a common myth that men have to deal with?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, right off the bat, I think it's like I was talking about this with my wife recently, which is like I think just in general, a common problem among men is that same kind of black and white thinking of like you have some men who go all in and they're so into health, like they work out all the time, they eat really healthy. But on the opposite end, you have so many men who completely neglect it. And so there's sort of that idea of like, I either have to like completely be all in or I'm just not going to do anything. And I think it's a myth that you have to be like obsessed about health in order to promote good health within yourself. Um, and that's why, talking about dietitians, so I'm normally like in many fields, males can be like the dominant group within any kind of like field of choice, right? But within dietitians, 95% of dietitians are women. And I think that's the reason for that is probably because a lot more women understand like the value of health and understand like this is what I want to promote and be a part of, whereas a lot of men just neglect that. And I think it's unfortunate and is the reason that I work with a lot of men and try to get them to understand like this is actually a barrier to you doing well in so many other aspects of life that
Hmm.
you really care about, which is like, you know, promoting good workspace for yourself, helping take care of a family, helping to, reach goals and dreams and things like that. And so I think just neglecting health and realizing that it doesn't have to be you're either obsessed about health or you completely neglect it altogether.
Yeah, that's great. We have to come into the middle and support the men folk. You know, they get put in this Homer Simpson category oftentimes too.
Yeah.
Right? And men do care, and we want our men folk to be really healthy. And I've been actually studying a lot recently, doing some research on reproductive health in men, and that
Mm-hmm.
is so important. You know, for not only our species, but for if people want to have babies, how important
Yeah.
good nutrition is, good mental health, and all the things that go into that. And I think guys kind of get sidelined on a lot of those care things. Um, on how to care for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's at the heart of it too, and is the reason why, because it probably doesn't align with a lot of like men's, I don't know, like cultural values, I guess I would say. And so culturally, I think a lot of men feel like, well, if I'm gonna like, you know, get in the kitchen and like prep my food and make sure that I have like vegetables and, make sure that I go for a walk and take time for like silence so that I can like calm my nervous system. Those all feel like culturally more like female traits. So I
Mm.
think a lot of men think to themselves, I'm not supposed to lean into that.
Hmm.
But I just, that too is kind of a myth where those can be seen from a very different perspective if that's what it takes to get those habits going. And you can see those as like, well, those are actually very empowering and can make you a much stronger person, a much more like functional human being who can accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. And I think that's, I don't think there's any gender that's left out of that where like both male and female both want to be strong, capable people. And so it takes nourishing yourself and making sure that you're healthy and well through things like good nourishment through food, making sure that you're taking time for yourself to rest, making sure that you're managing your stress and being physically active. So all those things play a role, but I don't think they have to be, um, I guess, like siloed into one gender per se.
Right, right, right. Yeah, all both genders. We all need to eat healthy, good foods. And so, what would a good dinner and mealtime look like for a healthy family? I like to focus on families. I like to get to the core of things, help kids and parents avoid long term issues. So, do you advocate for consistent family meals and some regularity and normalcy in that? Does that help create a really loving foundation?
Oh my gosh, yes. So in my book, there's a point where I talk about sort of the cultural differences, and one of the reasons that we've seen this sort of modern shift, especially in America, um, with people not eating as well and having like just worse health overall. And I think it stems from that really basic unit of like family time. And so you'll see this across other cultures where they really value like the food and family experience.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Like
And so
Asian families, Latin families,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, you can go to so many cultures
Europeans,
around the world.
pretty much around the whole entire world. What happened to America?
Yeah. Well, it's a very like individualistic society that we live in now, where it's like we have so much desire to make money, provide for ourselves, get after it, do all these things and be so busy
Hmm.
that we're really, I think we said this earlier, we're sidelining the ability to nourish ourselves. And so it's very unfortunate that we don't have that table to come back to consistently. And really, statistically speaking, there's so many people who have very few friends or like loved ones that they can sit down at a meal with. And so it's almost like I don't even blame people for not having like a shared meal to have with people, because that's just what they know and what they've been brought up in. But I do think that the way back to better meals and to consistent eating specifically is to have those consistent times where you're sitting down with people, where you're all making food together, you're eating mindfully, and you're being part of that kind of that communal experience. And so I think we see a lot of improvement from people who begin to do that. And I love that you focus on the family aspect of it, because I do think the family unit is like the backbone of society. You see societies thrive the most when it really supports what families are doing. It supports the fact that parents are the ones that are supposed to bring up kids really well. And if we can bring up kids well around a food table and discuss things in a safe, open space, we can nourish our bodies. Then we see all those downstream effects of better health. And kind of circling back to earlier, we'll probably see a lot less struggle with disordered eating if we have those kind of like those family communal experiences.
Hmm. And I keep thinking, like in my mind, fun keeps coming in. Like make it pleasurable and enjoyable. I think because we have become so, like you said, individualistic, focused on money, that we do lose that sacred connection that food creates in our family and our communities. And sitting down and cooking with your kids and making it joyful and conversational. And please back me up on this. Like, please, no cell phones at the table, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you're bringing up such a good point of like specifics to what families should be doing. So I'm thinking about like I have two young kids now,
How
and
old
we're
are your
going.
kids? They're Max and Colin.
Yeah, so they're 3 and 1.
Oh, so cute and little.
I know. So they're getting into it, and we're already, my wife's a therapist. I'm a dietitian. So it's like, okay, we have a lot of the like food and mental health resources at our disposal to get our kids to eat well and to do really well. But guess what? We still struggle like everyone at meal.
Right. Yes,
So
you don't get a pass.
yeah, and you are not alone. So if you're struggling with it, guess what? The professionals are as well with their kids.
100%. I think that's a huge point to make. Thank you for saying that. So what
Yeah,
do you guys do? So it's family meal. So putting the phones away. So obviously your 1 year old's not toting around his iPhone.
that's right. Yeah, I think the phone as kind of a separate thing has been a huge piece that me and my wife are like, this needs to be a big part of our lives, is removing this, because if we want to model that for them as they grow up, there's no way they're going to find that it's normal, to not be on social media if we're on our phones all day, if we're showing that behavior. So we've made a concerted effort to do that. It's been very challenging, but I think we've slowly gotten better and removed it from places like that so that we can focus on our kids, because when they have meltdowns at the table, we can now, not be sidetracked by like, well, let me just send this one email. It's like, okay, I can actually take time to say, what's wrong? Let's talk through this. And then we can have much better outcomes from that engagement. And then I'm thinking just like brainstorm wise, like other things at mealtime that we've been trying or we just know has kind of been helpful for our kids is we make sure that fun component stays in. So you mentioned, getting the joy part of meals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that can pull away from that is kind of the selfish desire. And I say selfish because I felt this, over the last few months, just this pull from my own, kind of internal self is, I want my kid to grow and be as healthy as possible. And so I'll oftentimes kind of like project that onto them and say, I need you to eat the rest of the plate, or you need to eat this bite of meat, or you really need to like make sure you're eating more before you leave the table. And it comes from this almost like place of anger, because it's really about me in that moment, instead of turning on them and saying, okay, like, let's make sure that we can eat a little bit more food, because I know you love running around. I know you want to be strong. You always say you want to
Right.
be me. And so kind of engaging with them and saying, hey, this is for you. Like, I want you to be happy and healthy. And, let's explore some more of the color in the food. Let's explore the texture. Maybe we can swap out some other things. We can have dessert alongside things sometimes. And I think that joyful creativity and kind of turning it away from my selfish desire for them to eat perfectly, I think that helps quite a bit.
Absolutely, yeah, because every parent's gone through that. Let me tell you, my kids are in their adulthood, in their 20s and early 30s, and I struggled with all those things too. And I wish I had done certain things differently, but my kids are great eaters. I'm sure yours will turn out to be that as well. And I think it's just balance and kind of letting things roll off your back sometimes, and knowing, like the French fry incident the other night when I was out with my girlfriends, like sometimes it's going to be a French fry night, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're going to have the killer lasagna with the green salad and everything's going to be perfect and wonderful, but it's usually not. And uh, and I think that's where flexibility comes in. That can be really helpful for parents. Like, have some lofty goals, introduce lots of great foods to your kids, especially different flavors and cultures is really important. But don't get
Mhm.
bogged down with, white knuckling it at the table till like 10 o'clock at night, being authoritarian about it. But it's a fine balance, because you don't want to flip out and say weird things to your kids. Uh, that's going to
Yeah,
trigger them long term. So,
that's right. And I was thinking again, we talked about the example earlier of like stress over the course of a day is much worse than eating one French fry. And I think the same thing is true about like, if you think, within the context of one meal versus a lifetime, if your kid doesn't eat a broccoli piece at one meal, is that better or worse than, screaming at them that you need to finish that one piece of broccoli?
100%, exactly. If anything, I would like, you're missing out, kids.
Right.
You
Yeah.
kind
There's a
of
much.
want to lead them to it. Like, what are you eating? I want to have some of that. That looks really good, and you're looking pretty amazing and healthy.
That's right. And they say, it can take up to like 15 exposures of a food to get used to it. And so it's hard to expect a person or any human at all to really be comfortable. This is their first time engaging with a lot of it. So to say, if you don't eat your broccoli, then I'm going to be angry. I'll take away this, X, Y, and Z, instead of, hey, let's just try again tomorrow. And eventually, you're working with really new people in a lot of ways. And so just engage.
Exactly. Yeah, and throw it in different. Do a soup one day. Do your broccoli in a egg omelet. Do your broccoli in a Mexican dish, and see what people like. And I think it's exposure is a huge thing. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so do you have any parting shares you want to offer our community on things that you have learned as a nutritionist and a dietitian in your life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, in this conversation, what I'm reminded of is think of the bigger picture. And so a lot of people, when they think about their nutrition, it's oftentimes so, I guess, like small picture oriented. They think so obsessively about, did I have the wrong breakfast today? And that food noise is just so heavy on them. Like, did I eat the wrong thing? I guess I'm just going to binge later because of it.
Hmm.
Or, did I eat well today? Well, I guess I'm going to try to continue to be perfect throughout the rest of the day. Or like, did I eat over my calorie goal? And that's going to set off, this obsession or this annoyance or something. And really, our bodies are very like adaptable and flexible, and we're resilient people. And so I think if we can continue to say that, if I'm doing the right thing 80 to 90% of the time, that's gonna hold me together, and I'm gonna be health promoting, and just kind of look at the bigger picture of weeks, months, and years, as opposed to meals, calories, and specific, one-time incidents.
Yeah, that's perfect to say. That's like looking at the big picture. Hopefully, we're going to live long, healthy lives.
Mhm.
And at every different stage of life, we can increase our health. And I think one of the things I'm hearing from you, Parker, is being kind to yourself.
Yep.
I think that's like the real big overarching feeling I'm getting is that we're so tough on ourselves and beating ourselves up, and life's challenging as it is. Just take pleasure in the food and the beautiful food that we get to have, and relax a little bit and listen to yourself. Am I right? Because it seems like it feels sad if we can't enjoy this one thing that we all get to enjoy together as food.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you're kind to yourself, it's not just this like woo woo, oh, I'm going to be soft. It's really empowering, and it's actually going to make you a lot more strong and resilient. And I think that's what everyone wants.
Oh, that's so good. All right. Well, what's your website? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's parkernelsonrd.com. And you can either work with me from that site, or you can find things like my book. My book's on Amazon, Nutrition Nonsense. And then I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram. Nutrition Advocate is the name I use. And so you can find me there.
I love that. Well, I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So again, I am Jill Troderman. This is Feeding the Family. We are streaming live from Santa Cruz, California on santacruzvoice.com. And join us next week. We have a great guest on, Mira Desi, talking about pantry food items. So continue eating well and lots of love to everybody. Peace out.